BPAC. Before we begin today, I would like to present the case of Pachelbel versus Billy Joel. So what do you say, guilty? So Pachelbel, that was written in 1680. Piano Man was written in 1973. Obviously, there was no copyright back in 1680. But if there were a lawsuit, I would check it out. Beethoven might be in it as well, though. Beethoven Sonata Opus 109. This is the very opening sequence. There's about, let's see. Listen. Yeah, Billy Joel right there. So we're going to talk about harmony today. Who owns it? What does it exist of? What's the math behind it? And it's an enormous subject. I'm going to be your professor for the next 20 minutes or so, and then I'll show you some examples of pop music in particular, where you see kind of the math of music, how it plays out, and how simple it is. So let's do about 1 year's worth of music theory in 20 minutes. About 1 minute per concept. If you get lost, just you'll be all right. I'll make it simple. So first of all, where does sound come from? Now, we're going to talk about harmony today. We're not going to talk about the other aspects of math like rhythm, all sorts of, there's volume we could talk about with velocity. Any aspect of music you can analyze in terms of mathematics. But let's focus on harmony. So sound waves come from, sound waves are measured by vibrations per second. So for example, what's A440? In America, we tune the orchestra, the piano, the band. Pop music is all tuned to A440. A440 simply means that the wave, the sound wave, or you can see it like a piano string, it vibrates 440 times per second, and that creates this sound right here. Let me pull up an interesting diagram. It's the Overtone Series. Now, 440 times per second is the fundamental note. So you can imagine a string in this diagram, for example, that very first string where you see one, basically, that the whole string vibrates together. If you go next to that, the second one, the string vibrates in the middle, and there's a node in the middle, and it vibrates actually on each side twice as fast as that. That's called the second harmonic. The next one next to it, as you'll see, it separates into 3 different parts. That's the third harmonic. And that vibrates 3 times as fast as the fundamental, the first harmonic. And then so on it goes. There's a 4th, 5th one. This diagram shows 16 different harmonics. Let me play it for you. Here we go. Oh, I love that. The first time I heard that, it just blew my mind. Tonight, my goal, if I can do one thing, is to blow your mind at least once. Now, what's incredible about this is that you're looking at all 16 of those, and they keep going. Each of them is the fundamental times 2, or times 3, or times 4, or times 5. All of that happens in a single string at the same time. Now, if you can picture that, you're beyond me. But it all vibrates, all those at the same time, and all those pitches that you hear. Let me play it again. Imagine hearing all of these pitches at the same time. So this is what the universe gives us in terms of sound. This is a G, the fundamental. I think that's it. And any pitch you start on will give you that exact same mathematical sequence. Some of those notes, for those of you who are listening with more kind of maybe with perfect pitch or great relative pitch, you'll notice that many of them are out of tune. And that's a problem. And we'll come to that in a minute. But some of them are absolutely in tune to an extent that you very rarely hear. You can't hear it on the piano. And we'll come back to that too. So these vibrations is all mathematics. This brings us to what's called the circle of fifths. And before we get into the circle of fifths, let's talk a little bit about half steps and whole steps. Okay, we got my keyboard down here. Here's middle C. If I start with a middle C, for example, and I want to go up a half step, you just go to the very next note. And if I want to go down a half step, you would start here and you go down a half step. So that's a half step. A whole step, as you've probably already guessed, is 2 half steps. So if I want to go up a whole step, I would just make it 2 half steps. Or if I want to go down a whole step, it's just 2 half steps, like so. That's also called a second, which is an interval. An interval is the space between 2 notes. We're already like in week 5 of harmony, all right? Now, that's a second. Here's a third. So 1, 2, 3. That's a third. That's called a major third. This would be called a minor third. It's just 1 half step smaller. Major is bigger. Minor is smaller. The next one is a fourth. This is called a perfect fourth. Same in major and minor. Here's a fifth, perfect fifth again. And this diagram we have up here is called the circle of fifths. So this will become important in a moment. That's a fifth. Then here's a sixth. We're just going up 1 key at a time, adding 1 at a time. That's a major sixth. This would be a minor sixth. Here's a major seventh, and here would be a minor seventh, also called a dominant seventh. And then we get to an eighth, and we don't call it the eighth, we call it the octave. So now we've got intervals. How do you put together harmony then? So harmony can be just 2 notes together, played together, but usually it's considered to be 3 or more notes played together. And so, for example, the first, second, third, fourth, and fifth notes of a scale, if you take the first note and the third note and the fifth note, you would get a C major chord. But first, how do you form a scale? All right, now that we've got intervals, we can form it basically if you have a whole step, which is 2 half steps, right? Again, we're starting from middle C. Then if you go up another whole step, half step plus a half step, and then the next one is a half step. So from here to here is a half step because there's no note in between. From the F to the G, we did a whole step now. Now we need another whole step, and then a half step. So now we're at the octave. But first, all these notes, what do we call them? So, as you probably know, but for those who don't, let's review. I was saying this is a C, this is a D, etc. The musical alphabet is 7 notes. And if you go down from middle C here, we have B, A. So starting from A, we have A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then the alphabet starts over again. So we have again A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So all of these are all A's. And as we talked about before, in the harmonic series, these notes are most commonly presented throughout the harmonic series, and the human ear perceives those as the same, but lower and higher. And what else should you know? Oh, the piano, white keys and black keys. So, you see the black keys are grouped in 2s and 3s. These are the sharps and flats, the black notes. So, if you want to find middle C, you take the group of 2 black notes. Right to the left of that is C. This happens to be what's called middle C. And then all those notes in the keyboard that are right to the left of the C here, or of the 2 black notes, is C. Okay, now what about sharps and flats? So, a sharp simply means that if you're on a C, if you sharp it, C sharp would be 1 note higher than C. So sharp just means go up. It looks like a number sign. So now we have a half step up. That's C and C sharp. D, if you want to make D sharp, you just go to the very next note. What about E? So here's E. E sharp would be, there's no black note here, right? So E sharp would just be the same as F. Now what about this? You've probably already figured this out. This could be D sharp, but it could also be E flat. And basically it's just like walking down the street. You say when you get to this, you get to the corner, you turn left. If you're coming from the opposite side, you might say you get here and then you turn right. It's just 2 ways of calling the same note. All right, now let's go to the circle of fifths. Now don't worry if you don't catch all of this, but it will all come together. Then I'm going to show you some musical examples, so this will be worth it all. The scale, one other thing with the numbers is that a scale, no matter what note you start on, you've got a whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. That's our major scale. No matter what note you start on the piano, you will get that same, if you use that same shape, that same pattern, you will get a major scale. So let's start on, for example, G. With middle C was here, so C, D, E, F, G. From G, if you use that same pattern, whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step. So now we're going to need a black note. That's where we get our F sharp here, and then half step. So here's our G major scale. And those are the 7 notes of the G major scale. You can start at any note you want, and if you use that same pattern, a geometric pattern essentially, a pattern of intervals, then you will get that same major scale. Let's see. One other thing to touch on quickly, and I know I'm moving fast, but I just want to give you just a primer in all this. C major, for example. If you start on the first note of the scale, like we talked about before, to create a major chord, you're stacking thirds. So you've got a third plus a third. C, E, and G is a major, C major chord. If you want to turn that into a minor chord, you simply take the third and you lower it by a half step, and now you've got C minor. C minor sounds darker. Some people say it sounds sad. This is brighter, this is C major. Now, what's cool is if you can take this one single chord, and any of you can do it, C major chord, you can play all of the chords of C major just by moving that block, like this little Lego block, up 1 step at a time. So this is C major. If you go up the C major scale, which is just the white notes, then you would have this, major, minor, minor. So that's called D minor. Major, minor, this is minor. Here's the 4 chord, the F chord, that's major. The 5 chord, because this is the 5th degree of the C major scale. So here's the 5 chord, that's major. The 6th chord is minor. The 7th chord, let's not worry about. This is called diminished. That's for another day. But with these 6 chords, C major, you can essentially play about 90% of pop music, popular music, with just those 6 chords. And once you can play in C major, using the same patterns and the same mathematical formulas, you could transpose it and play any key you want. But let's stay in C for the moment. What about, for example, I think you all learned as kids to play like Heart and Soul. That's just using C major. Now, what's the math of this? So C major, since we're in C major, the C major chord is called the 1 chord. And then if we want to go to the 6th chord, count your way up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Here's the 6th chord, that's minor. That's the 2nd chord of Heart and Soul, for example. And now we need the 4 chord. So from 6, we go down to 5, then down to 4. Now we've got the 4 chord, which is major. And we end with the 5 chord. So go up from 4 up to 5, and now we're at 5. So the pattern is, we're in C major, it's 1 chord, 6 chord, 4 chord, 5 chord. Right? 1, 6, 4, 5. All right, getting my other piano going here. So, and each of those chords that we talked about before is also numerical, so that I'm playing the 1st and the 3rd and the 5th. That's what gives us a triad, the C major triad. So you have the math of the individual chord plus the math of as you're moving around the chords. But it's pretty basic once you get used to it. Next step would be, let's say, well, can we take it to G major? You go up to 5th, go up a 5th from C, D, E, F, G. That's the last letter of the musical alphabet. And you can start, create your triad just like before. 1, and you go down. Then here's where you run into trouble. Now you need your F sharp because in the key of G major requires a sharp. So now we're back to circle of fifths. So look at this diagram here. In an octave, how many notes are there? There's white notes. There's the 7 letters of the alphabet, right? Starting from C, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and then you get C again. But then there's all these black notes too. So there's the 5 black notes, and there's the 7 white notes. I want to show you one thing before we move on. Listen to this sound. See how dissonant that is? I'm using, it's a chord with 12 notes. And I've already played you this chord tonight. Listen. It's 12 notes. That's every single note of the musical alphabet. But this time, instead of playing it like this, which sounds like noise, it's so dissonant. You've got all these. The way I've done it is that I've spread it out with open fifths. So the 5th, 5th, 5th. And it starts to sound like this exotic, beautiful, open sounding. It's kind of magical. Okay, so circle of fifths. Start at 12 o'clock. See, it looks like a clock up there. It's fidgeting a little bit. So C major is no sharps or flats. So it's essentially we're just talking about all the white keys, right? All right. Then that's at 12 o'clock. If you want to move to the right clockwise, you'll get to G major. And so what you need to do, the reason it's called a circle of fifths is because if you go up the C major scale to the 5th note, the 5th degree of the scale, C, D, E, F, G, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now you've got this 5th, right? Now we're going to start from G major. G major is at the 1 o'clock position on the clock, right? 1 o'clock, and that represents essentially for us right now 1 sharp. So when you play the G major scale like we did earlier, when you're doing whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, that requires that F sharp. And then you got G again. So if you get the G major, that's 1 sharp. The same thing happens as you go around the circle of fifths clockwise. From G to D, just count up this G major scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now we're at D, and from D, in order to create the D major scale, you keep the same sharp that you had from G major, and which you'll, if you use major second, whole step, right? Or whole step, half step, whole step, half step. Now we got D major. And so it goes, that's 2 sharps. If you keep going to 3 o'clock, A major, that's 3 sharps. E major, 4 o'clock is 4. B and you get all the way to 6 o'clock, that's F sharp major. If you were to keep going from F sharp to C sharp, that C sharp major actually requires 7 sharps, and it's a nightmare for the young musician to play. So now let's go back to 12 o'clock, and we'll go the opposite direction in the circle of fifths. So this is the land of this is called, so people call it the dark side. These are the flats. So if you're going from C, if you go down a fifth instead of up a fifth, you get to F. So down a fifth from C to F, now you can create a major scale, but following again whole step, half step, you'll notice that the fourth note of the scale is going to be flatted. So F major has one flat. The flat is required to keep that shape, that geometric shape for the major scale. To go down to, what are we at? 10 o'clock, B flat, we'll go to B flat major now. So you go down from F down to B flat, and you're able to go up the scale. And the fourth degree of the scale is going to be an E flat. So now you've got 2 flats. And as you go down around the counterclockwise from C major, you'll add 1 flat at a time until you get to G flat, which is at the 6 o'clock position. And if you keep going beyond G flat, you're actually going to arrive where you see the B, you're going to arrive at C flat major, which again is one of those key signatures that when you're first learning it, every single note is flat. So it confuses the brain a little bit. Now, I want to come back to the Overtone series, because we've got these 12 notes, right? And you can see that if you go through the circle of fifths, just going up a fifth at a time, you'll get all 12 of those notes. So the universe essentially gives us those notes. If you also look at the Overtone series before, the Overtone series also gives us all 12 of those notes. I think there's one still missing up here. As you get higher, 17th, 18th or so, you get all 12 of them. But the curious thing is that even though this is from nature, it existed from the time, say, of the Big Bang, which curiously scientists have measured the Big Bang as measuring about 120 decibels, which is about the sound, which is about the volume of a rock concert, if you're by the speakers. But anyway, ever since there was sound at the beginning of the universe, and perhaps before, the biblical telling of the universe, we say in the beginning was the Word, and so the Word essentially is music. That's how I see it, at least. And perhaps music existed before creation existed, who knows. But as long as it's from the beginning of this universe, there's been sound. And as humans, we're able to tell the difference between A440 and A460, which really blows the mind. Imagine counting that many vibrations per second, but we can hear it. And then if you go up an octave, which is the first harmonic of a note, an octave is exactly double the number of vibrations per second. So if we're at A440, the octave above that is A880, right? And if you keep going up, you have twice that. But as you go down, the opposite is of course true. So A440, if you go down an octave, is A220, right? And then A110, A55. And all this is perfect and wonderful, except there's one problem that arises when you're going around the circle of fifths, which is really important and something that throughout the Renaissance, but mainly in the Baroque period, became a real thing, because composers wanted to compose in all 12 keys. And another time we'll talk about minor keys, which are related to the major keys, but they wanted to compose in all the keys, and they wanted it to sound in tune, but the universe gave us a little bit of a problem. In that, if you go around the circle of fifths, one note at a time, you finally get back to 12 o'clock in C, but when you get back to C, if all these were exactly perfect, which would be the second harmonic is twice the fundamental, so fundamental times 2. The third harmonic, which is the fifth, which is why it's so fundamental to our understanding of harmony, this is 2 times the fundamental. So if you take this fifth, bring it down the octave, So this is the fifth of the fundamental here. This G should, if it were perfect, it should actually be 2 cents flatter than what you're hearing right now. And what is a cent? So you can think of a cent as a penny. It's a percentage. A cent is 1/100th of a half step. So it's very small amount, right? Between these two notes, there's basically a 2% difference in what you should be hearing. This should be actually 2%, 2 cents lower, or higher rather. But if all of the fifths are 2 cents off, by the time you get from the whole circle of fifths, 2 cents, 2 cents, 2 cents, 2 cents, 2 cents, 2 cents, then 12 notes, 12 fifths at 2 cents equals 24 cents, right? So now you are, by the time you get back here, you are now 24 cents off. And that's pretty short. So that's a quarter of the difference between a half step. And so what was decided, there were all sorts of different experiments, and there continue to be experiments to today. But what's generally been decided upon in order to be able to create the music as we know it is to take away 2 cents from each of the fifths, and each of the half steps is equidistant. So essentially when you make all the fifths 2 cents smaller than they should be, which means they're out of tune by 2 cents, then you're able to bring all the half steps together equidistant. And what that does is I can be in C major, then I can go into A flat major, and it's still in tune. I could play more extravagant chords. And all these distant sounds will all sound in tune, or if you like, they'll all sound equally out of tune. And now we've gotten so used to it that when you actually hear the Overtone Series, and I'll play it one more time for you, listen to it and notice if you can see if anything's out of tune, or if something just sounds a little bit off. Yeah. Oh, it sounds so good and so bad at the same time. So now I want to move into a little bit of musical examples. So I hope you're managing through all. I know there's a lot of information. That is literally like a whole semester's worth of music theory, plus a little bit of harmonics and the math behind it, all in about 20 minutes or so far. So I mentioned before, from the time of Pachelbel, for example, we already had all these chords, these basic chords. You'll notice in that example, I'm in C major, and I'm only using all the white keys. There's no sharps or flats, but all the chords are very modern. They're what we use in popular music all the way to this day. And this series of chords, in this particular series, and this style of a descending bass line, is like a musical meme that's existed for centuries and centuries. Even before Pachelbel, probably maybe 50 or so years before Pachelbel, there were already composers who were composing with this. In Pachelbel, the bass line is a little bit different, but the chords are the same. And other composers like Beethoven, he was pretty close to Pachelbel, but still a ripoff, right? But that's what composers do. They borrow things, they take memes, they play around with it. There was no copyright back then, and the idea of having a lawsuit like you see nowadays, where one pop singer will sue another pop singer because they think that they stole their harmonic sequence or their combination of harmony and melody, it's kind of ludicrous because that's what this is all about. Hey Jude, for example, Beatles. Okay, count the number of chords we have so far. Okay, 2, 3, 4. So essentially we have 3 chords because the first chord and the last chord are the same. We're in the key of F major. It could be C, it doesn't really matter. But let's keep it in F, so the original, out of respect. So we've got a 1 chord in F. That's just F major, right? So if you're in F major, like we said before, the F major chord in F major is called the 1 chord, and it's that triad, major triad, that just comes from the F major scale. So we got Hey Jude. And the second chord is the second most important chord of any key, which is the dominant. Dominant is the 5th degree of the scale. And like you see out of the Overtone series, that 5th, the 5th is so prominent in the Overtone series, and we feel it as being very, very close to the original note. So in Hey Jude, we've got 1, then 5. Then you've got, depending on which version of it, you've got a 2 chord, which is minor, and then you're back to 1 again. So we've only used a 1 chord, a 5 chord, a 2 chord, and then back a 1. So 1, 5, 2, 1. We've used 3 chords, but the Beatles have really taken these basic elements, primary colors, that we, as humans, because they're primary, because they're so close to the resonance of the universe, we feel very comfortable with them. I think that's why pop music has so few chords. You might have 6 chords, and yet to really make a great pop song, like Hey Jude, to use only 6 or 7 chords and to create all this wonderful music is kind of ingenious. Skipping ahead in Hey Jude, we've got, oh yeah. Any Beatles fans out there? I hope so. So, did you just notice what happened in the bass line? Listen again. Okay, Beatles have to join this lawsuit. We've got Pachelbel, we've got Beethoven, we've got Beatles, and Billy Joel obviously stole from all of them, right? Little variations, but it's the same thing. And again, they're all very basic chords. We're only using about 5 chords in the key of F to get all of that beautiful brilliance. What I love about Hey Jude, though, comes at the end of it. You know when you get to the na, na, na part at the end? Let's see, how does it? So how many chords is that? We've got F major, and again, the lyrics in the brilliance of the Beatles is na, 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 comma, na, 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 na. Feel free to sing along. How many chords was that? It was 3, and then we came back to 1 again. So there's not a whole lot going on, right? But wait, what is that? Okay, we're in the key of F major, which remember the circle of fifths, C going, it's right up on the screen here. C going 1 step counterclockwise is just 1 degree of the circle of fifths down, which has a key. You can see this treble clef, that squiggly little thing, and the flat looks like a B. F major has 1 flat. And so we should have chords that look like this. 2 chord, 3 chord, 4 chord, 5 chord, 6 chord. Again, the 7 chord, don't worry about it. And then 1. But suddenly, in the middle of all this na, na, na business, you've got this. What are all those flats doing? So we've got, let's simplify it. We've got E flat, G, B flat. So we should only have 2 flats, but we've got 3. And what's happened is, and this is kind of extraordinary, but in a very kind of modest way, because you're expecting only 6 notes in this popular music. You're expecting these 6 chords, and suddenly it's like Spider-Man jumping in a totally different key. What's happened is we've jumped from 1 of our tonic. Our tonic is F major, and we've jumped to the 4th chord of the 4th chord of F major. So it's the 4th of the 4th. So, which means if you were to go up the scale, and we're in B flat major now, imagine B flat major is our new tonic, and now you go to the 4th of that. The 4th chord in the key of B flat major, now we're at the 10 o'clock position of the circle of fifths. B flat major has 2 flats. We're in B flat major, that's the 1 chord. You go up 4, the 4 chord, E flat major. How do we get from F major to E flat major? There's no reason for it. It's just like, it's like you're going along, like I said, Spider-Man, it's like you jump way out. And after that happens, it falls down a 4th, right? And then it falls down a 4th again. But this time it fell down a 4th, and where do we end up? We ended up exactly where we started. F major, 1 chord. Fall down a 4th. And it's such a brilliant move. And it's so catchy. So there's this innate tension. It's warm, it's a major chord, but it's so exotic, and it's full of this kind of unusual tension, and it demands to go back to where you started. So it falls down, you're way up here, fall down a 4th, then fall down a 4th. And what I think is so funny about this song is you've got all this Hey Jude lyrics, and then you get to this little coda bit, which is na 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 na, and it's like 75% of the song. And what the Beatles would do is they would play this. Imagine you're in the Beatles. You're doing this song night after night. Everybody wants to hear Hey Jude. And when you get to Hey Jude, when you get to na na na, they've got this thing going, and they know it's good, and the whole audience is singing along. Na na na. One. And you can just hear like John going 38 more times. And it's like, 37. And at this point, if it were me, I would probably think, great opportunity for a fade out, right? Maybe slow down a little bit. And you end, it was a great way to end the song, right? But no, it's like 38 more times. It's hilarious. But it's so good, and it's so effective. The audience stays with it. Very simple, very primal. Again, there's these primal colors, and then when you throw in something just a little bit exotic, mathematically exotic, we respond to it. We don't know why, but we feel it, and we feel that tension of wanting to resolve. Okay, I got one more example for you, and then we'll call it a day. Imagine. And go back to, here we go, yeah. Here's the intro. I've got to jump back to the Renaissance. So in the Renaissance, before we had major and minor, we had these modes, which were basically you would take like what we now call C major, all the white notes. And if you were to start on the D, you could create what we would think of as a C major scale, but they're treating that second degree of the scale as the starting point. And that's one of many modes. You don't have to remember what they're all called, but there's Dorian, Phrygian, Mixolydian, Lydian. There's all these different modes, and they all use, if you're thinking in terms of C major, they all use just the white notes. And so this was before there were sharps and flats, or this actually led there to there being sharps and flats. So Gregorian chant, you might have something that would go like, in the Catholic Church down in the Middle Ages. And you'll notice I said there are no sharps and flats, but I played one flat. Right, and the reason I had to do that is because if the melody were to go up to that B natural, you're probably feeling that unbearable tension that they felt in the Renaissance, or maybe not, but they could not bear the sound of that B natural. In fact, it was so abrasive to their ear that it was considered to be a spell, essentially, to invite Satan into your presence. So it was called the devil's interval, and it was illegal. Even today, we still hear this interval, which is the tritone, the devil's interval, and it's the sound between this F and this B natural, which we even now think is very abrasive, which is why we use them for the sound of ambulances. So in order to avoid invoking the devil, they invented the B flat. And so now you could sing spiritual music and keep it in the realm of God, just by that one flat, lowering it to avoid the tritone. So now let's come back to Imagine. And there's reason to this madness. So now we're in C major. C major chord is just a one chord. Again, primal, all in the Overtone series if we were in C major. The Overtone series, again, you've got the octave, then you've got the fifth, then you've got the same, it's the principal, 2 octaves up, and this is the second, third, fourth. The fifth overtone is the major third. That's why the major sound is so embedded in what we feel about music. It's so embedded in the universe. So we're in C major, we've got a C major triad, this is a one chord, and then Imagine on the fourth beat, 1, 2, 3, you suddenly get. Now, so far so good, except throughout the Renaissance, throughout the Baroque period, throughout classical music, the classical period, much of the Romantic period, this chord was considered dissonant. Because you've got this sound. If I bring them closer together, bring the B down an octave, see how dissonant that is? So it's a beautiful dissonant note. Most of the beautiful notes in music, actually, that make us feel this dissonance, they make us feel emotionally connected. These are the beautiful notes, those points of tension. And then the resolution is a relief, right? So we've got this tense note that wants to resolve up to C, B to C. But at a certain point around the middle of the 19th century, composers started saying, well, what if we were to imagine that instead of being dissonant, that sound was consonant? So you have a famous piece, for example, by Eric Satie in France. Here's a G major 7 chord. Sounds very jazzy to our ears. Revolutionary at the time it was composed. And then another, this is a 1 chord, and then a 5 chord. Very simple, but we just add the major 7 to it. This is also the major 7. It's delicious. And then Satie just added a beautiful melody on top of that. Now when we hear a major 7th chord like that, because jazz has come since then, and jazz, one of the basic chords of jazz is the major 7 chord. That's really just a starting point, but it's a basic jazz chord. And so in Imagine, you've got the 4th beat at major 7, and it's so cool and rich and marvelous. There's also a certain degree of tension in it, but we hear it more as consonant. But what happens in the next bar? It's a 4 chord. Now, to go from a 1 chord to a 4 chord, again, circle of fifths, you have C, 11 o'clock position, F major. If in the key of C, 1, 2, 3, 4, the 1 chord, the 4 chord, 5 chord, those are our primary colors. So to go from a 1 chord to a 5 chord is not exceptional. It's rather kind of banal. but what John Lennon and maybe Yoko Ono, I'm not sure, did in this fourth beat, C major 7, which is so delicious. And it also has a little bit of tension. And then when we get to the F major, it's like we've stepped backwards, just like we've gone from 12 o'clock, stepped back to 11 o'clock, then back up to 12 o'clock to C. This is called the subdominant, the 4 chord, just below the dominant chord. And there's also hidden in this B natural, then to F major, we have just summoned the devil. Listen again. In the Renaissance, this would have literally sent you to prison and probably brought about your death. And then in the fourth beat, you've got that beautiful. So the tension resolving here, and then that little melodic F, C natural, B flat, going up to the B natural, like to say that wasn't an accident. And then back into C. Oh, it's great. Wait, is that an excerpt of the meme from Pachelbel's Canon? You be the judge. Yeah, thank you for being with me tonight. I hope this hasn't been too trying on your brain. I hope I've at least one point, I hope you've been like, wow. The Overtone Series, the circle of fifths, we've talked about intervals, major like whole steps, half steps. We've talked about seconds, thirds, fourths, fifths, sixths, and sevenths, and octaves. We've talked about major scales. We've brought you all the way to the circle of fifths and how it relates to sharps and flats. We've learned what sharps are. We've learned what flats are. We've learned about the Overtone Series. We've learned the math of the Overtone Series and how when you, in the second note of the Overtone Series, you're doubling the velocity of the string, that the string is dividing and all of that. Anyway, we've taken a lot of information. I've never seen a presentation that brings this all together in such a compact way, but I hope you'll take away some of the miraculous math that's behind all of this, that ultimately brings us the emotion that we feel in music. When you feel something emotionally in music from the chord that the math creates, you're reacting to math. You're reacting to the math of the universe, of sound waves. And I find that kind of extraordinary, that humans are able to tune into nature and tell the difference between A440 and A220 and A110 and A55. It's kind of extraordinary. So thanks for joining me. I'm going to be back sometime in the summer. We're going to have Ryan Book here 2 weeks from tonight. He'll be guitar, solo guitar, classical guitar. I'm looking forward to that. Again, I'll be back sometime in the summer, probably mid-July. And I really appreciate you being with us through this April and May series. It's really meant a lot to me to come together and bring us all together into this space of the college. So I really thank you for your support. If you have any kids ages 6 to 12 who want to be involved in the Twilight virtual choir and orchestra project, check that out on our homepage. I'm putting together, Twilight is from Encore Kids, and we're putting together a virtual choir of kids from all over to sing together Twilight, the song that I composed for these young kids. And so I'm excited about that. We'll also have members of our orchestra who are joining in, and other musicians who are joining in to play the orchestra parts. So check that out on our homepage, and thanks for joining us.